All right, we are live, and today we're going to discuss one of the hardest topics of them all. The topic is, does God really exist? Now, I do understand that this topic is extremely emotional for people on both sides. And a lot of people, they get super frustrated, or they even angry or furious if they hear the opposite view. So, as we discuss this subject, I hope that you will come to this with an open mind, with curiosity, and with the thought of, you know what, maybe I will not agree with everything that I'm hearing, but I want to understand what causes people to believe something that I don't. What caused people to change their mind? Why are there people who used to believe what I believe and they change their mind, and vice versa? So, with that in mind, I hope that you will join me in the discussion, and we will discuss, does God really exist? All right. All right. So I do understand that this subject is very emotional. And sometimes, believe me, I've been avoiding the subject for a long time, because the moment I say something on one side of the table, then there's opposition and it's very strong. There's a lot of ridicule. If somebody does not like discussing this with an open mind and with respect, please just turn off this video and watch something else. There's a lot of people who gave me a lot of hatred when I discussed this subject, and people are like, "Well, you should be ashamed of yourself. You're doing this, and you're that, and you're trying to convince people to your mindset." No, I'm not convincing anybody to nothing. I'm sharing my experience, I'm sharing my thought process. If you have certain questions and you're looking for answers, maybe my experience and my thoughts will resonate with you, maybe they will not. You get to choose what makes sense to you. And I encourage everybody to do as much research on the subject as possible, especially if you are a Jehovah's Witness who woke up and you left this religion and you are in search. You are in search of what is the truth, because maybe now you realize, hey, you know what? I thought the religion was true. I thought that what I believe was true, and we believed it because we thought this is the truth. We called it the truth. And when you realize that it's not, then you started questioning more things. You started questioning, is Bible the inspired word of God, or does God really exist? Where do I stand on this? What happens if I stop believing? What happens if I have doubts? I believe that this whole experience of living Jehovah's Witnesses should you should at least allow us to question other things, to say, you know what, I used to believe this really strongly, and mm, right now I changed my mind. I know that what I used to believe very strongly is not true. Maybe some of the things that I believe right now are not true. We should always leave ourselves a little bit of margin of error when it comes to all our beliefs, saying, if tomorrow I'm going to find out something new, if tomorrow I'm going to discover something I didn't know before, I'm going to learn a new perspective, we're going to find something different, new evidence will emerge, then I will change my mind. But based on the knowledge and experience that I have so far, this is the conclusion that I came up with. But that doesn't mean I'm not going to change my mind. I changed my mind many times in the past, and maybe I will change my mind in the future. So, as I discussed the subject, I went from a very strong believer as a Jehovah's Witness to a person who started questioning when they changed the doctrine of overlapping generation. And when that fell, that it was like a domino effect. You start learning more and more and more. And the more I learned, the more I realized, no, what they're teaching is far from what the Bible teaches, and it's far from reality, far from historical evidence, and a lot of things are completely illogical. That caused me to conclude that faith, that religion, is simply not true. I took the same the same mindset and I went into examining the Bible. First, I realized in order to believe what Jehovah's Witnesses believe, you have to be very good at cherry picking data. You have to look at what Jehovah's Witnesses did good. If they helped people, who were on drugs and they were homeless or they were lost, and them as a group really helped certain people, and you see all the good that they have done. And if you ignore all the bad, if you ignore all the damage that they have caused, then you will conclude it really is the true religion. But if you see the good, bad, and ugly, if you see the religion from different perspectives and you try to look at things objectively, then the conclusion is a little bit different. So I took the same mindset. I'm like, okay, I know what I was taught, but then I took the Bible and I started studying it very diligently. I read more than one translation. And then I came to the conclusion, no, I can't possibly conclude that the Bible is the Word of God. There's many contradictions. A lot of things seem super odd to me, and especially reading the Old Testament, my eyes were just opening up. Like, man, this is just a lot of stuff over there. Doesn't make sense. I will not discuss today about what is in the Bible and why I no longer view this book as an inspired Word of God, infallible. But today I'm going to discuss the God Himself, because I took the same mindset, right? Like if I look all the good scriptures in the Bible and I ignore all the bad ones, I just look at, maybe forgive your neighbor not 7 times but 77 times, right? And love your mother and your father, honor your mother and your father, and do not kill, do not steal. If I look at the good scriptures, and I'll kind of ignore all the ones where God will go and send bears to kill children, burn people alive, drown them. If I ignore all those scriptures where it's really difficult to see God as a loving and caring father, then you will conclude, yeah, the Bible is the inspired Word of God and everything's fine. But I wanted to look at things the same way as I look at Jehovah's Witnesses, like from the good, bad, and ugly, and from as many perspectives as possible, and try to put my own biases on the side and look what things really are. And when I read the Bible, first I read the New Testament, and I was in love with Jesus. I was like, this is the answer. Jesus is the way and the truth and the light. It's not the organization. I have to accept him in my heart. I felt like I was born again. I felt like I had this connection with Jesus. I was praying to him, and I'm like, wow, this is amazing. This is what Christianity is all about. It's not by works, it's by grace. And the whole salvation is simply by accepting Jesus in his heart. He paid for all our sins. I mean, I just from reading the Bible, not listening to anybody else, I'm like, the message is very clear, very simple, written by simple people, for simple people. I loved it. But then I started reading the Old Testament, and I'm like, totally different gods, totally different values, totally different behavior. It's not the God that I would copy his decisions. I would never take that God into a role model for me. I'm saying, okay, God did this, I will do the same. Because if God did this, that is an example of justice, of love, of caring, of forgiveness. If that is the example and it's written in his book, then I should be able to copy his decisions, and I should be able to be on the right path. I would not be able to copy any of his decisions, majority of his decisions, I would not be able to copy without ending up in jail. So the God of the Bible was a little bit difficult for me to accept. But I want to discuss with you, what are the arguments that people used towards me to convince me that God really exists, and why I was not convinced by their arguments. So the very first argument was a personal experience. Personal experience, basically, people say, you know what, I feel God in my life. There's something that happened, and that proves to them that God is real. Maybe somebody was sick and they prayed and the person got well, and the doctors cannot explain it. They're like, you know what, this person should not be well. Like, we don't know how that happened. I mean, it's stage 4 cancer, and all of a sudden that disappeared. So they conclude that because something good happened in their life and there's not really much of a logical explanation to it, therefore it must have been a divine intervention. Now, the problem with this reasoning is that it happens everywhere. It happens among atheists. It happens among people from other religions, people who believe in different gods. It happened also among people who believe in demons, people who go toward witchcraft. It happens all the time. So a personal experience, some people are like, well, I know for sure that God saved me because of X, Y, and Z. The problem with this X, Y, and Z that it happens everywhere. And it's very difficult for people to explain, well, why is it happening in different religions where people pray to a different God and they don't believe that your God is real, but the same things are happening and people feel exactly the same way. And the explanation that usually people say was like that's Satan. Satan is pretending to be the angel of light, and because of that, he's causing people to believe something that is not real. He's deceiving people this way by pretending to be good. Though the problem is that the same argument is being used on the other side. So if you're a Mormon, the Mormons would say, oh no, we have those holy garments, and the person has a car accident and the person has scratches and cuts all over his body, but he doesn't have the cuts where the garment is. So they'll say, see, that is a proof that God is protecting you. And because you had this holy garment on you and no cuts were done on your body where the garment is, this is a proof, undeniable proof that God was protecting you using the holy garment. Now, there's obviously people who get hurt and who have cuts and who did experience maybe even death wearing those garments, but they will not discuss those things, or they will not compare, those examples, or they will never run any statistic of how many people had an accident and how many of those people actually got hurt wearing the garments, or how many cuts were done outside of the garment area, and so on. So when you start putting a little bit of logical thinking and testing this theory, then everything falls apart. But they are strongly convinced because the evidence, as they claim, was presented to them from one side. So they say, this is what is happening, and this is why it's happening, and this is why we believe it. It's a proof. It's confirmation bias. You're only looking at the things that prove something that you already believe in. And if something is contradicting this, then you are justifying dismissing it, or maybe God is testing you, or we're not immortal, right? And then they come up with excuses. So this personal experience for me did not work, although I personally felt like I was connected with God. I felt like God answers my prayers. I felt like He is watching over me, that He is connected with me. And I had those feelings, but those feelings simply are not enough, because I do understand that people in other faiths had exactly the same feelings and they had exactly the same connection. And some people even heard voices. And I felt like during one prayer, I thought I heard Jesus talking to me, answering my prayer when I was begging Him to answer me. What should I do now? Like, I'm in this religion and where should I go? And then I heard like a voice in my head said, come to me, get out of it. There was the first answer, and the second one was, come to me. And I felt like, oh yes, I have to come to Jesus. I have to leave the false religion. He is the truth and the light. That was my experience. This is the first time I'm sharing this publicly, and that convinced me that Jesus must be the truth, that He must be the salvation, and He must be the Son of God, and thanks to Him and accepting Him in my heart, I will have salvation. Unfortunately, that experience many people shared, and many people who believe in different God, or they believe, let's say, Muhammad or Allah, they have a very similar experience. and they feel like Allah entered their heart, and they feel connected with Allah, and Allah answered their prayers, and they hear voices in their head saying this and this and this, and this is how Allah answered their prayers. So I saw the same pattern. I saw exactly the same results that people are getting. And I'm like, okay, personal experience can be deceiving, can be very deceiving, because everybody's using the same premises. And yet, in every religion, in every God there is that people ever created in their mind, in their heads, or made a statue of, they're using the same premises. So they're all dancing around the fire because there is no rain. All of a sudden it rains, and they're saying, see, because we danced around the fire for 3 hours with those sticks, with those masks on, with this rhythm, this caused the rain. And they actually believe it because it happened. So now they have clear evidence, and they're using this as an example. And people still till today live in different tribes following the same pattern. Okay, so for me, personal experience didn't work. Now, second, cause and effect reason. Cause and effect reason is one of the strongest arguments for supernatural being. Why? Because we live in what we call a Newtonian world, when there is action, and for every action there is equal and opposite reaction. Every cause has an effect, and we see that if something comes to existence, actually nothing comes to existence from the visible universe or detectable universe that we know. Everything is just changing its form. So we have energy and we have matter, and those two things change. You can take matter and turn it into energy. Now, the problem with this is people are saying, well, if you see everything around you, if you see all the energy and all the mass that is around us, it had to come from something. You cannot have nothing creating something. That's unscientific. Therefore, it must have been God. It must have been God who lives outside of space, time, and matter, because he's the one that caused space, time, and matter to exist. If he was inside the space, time, and matter, therefore he couldn't possibly be the one who creates space, time, and matter, because he would be in it. He has to be outside of it. That argument, at the beginning, it made sense to me, because I'm like, well, yeah, of course. You cannot have something that comes out of nothing, and you got to have some sort of superior being that is outside of space, time, and matter, that can create matter and can create energy. But then again, I came up with this question: who created God? If you're telling me that you cannot have something that came out of nothing, then where did God come from? You will never get rid of that question. You cannot say, oh, just God existed forever. Like, well, then you can very well say that the whole universe existed forever. I mean, one argument does not exclude the other. And for me, that didn't make sense. I'm like, yeah, if God exists, then who created God? That was a difficult thing for me to answer. The cause and effect. Now, the problem with this argument is people see an effect and they don't know the cause. And because they don't know the cause, automatically their mind is conditioned into finding the answer, even if the answer is incorrect or completely illogical. We just have to have an answer. So people saw lightning and they see and they hear thunder. They could not have the tools, knowledge, or ways of discovering where did lightning comes from. So they created a supernatural source explaining the things that happen naturally. And they'll say, yeah, there's Thor. He's got eyes. From those eyes, lightning comes. He has a hammer. He makes noise. This is why we can hear him. And he's angry with us. And because he's creating this thunder and storm and lightning, and he burned a whole bunch of fields, that means we have sinned and we have not pleased him well. and they had to gather a whole bunch of crops, and they made sacrifices to that god, and the sacrifices were in the best things that they had, including sometimes children, firstborn sons or virgins. And those kind of sacrifices were made. Why? Because they couldn't understand a natural phenomenon. So you see what happens the moment they understand what really took place. Now that God that they created in their heads disappears. It's no longer needed to explain something that previously was unexplainable. Now, do we have things that we don't understand fully? Of course. There are things like we don't know what caused the Big Bang, the beginning of things. We don't know what the cause was. But just because we don't know the cause does not automatically create a supernatural being. Just like with the lightning, we didn't know where the lightning comes from, but that does not conclude that does not automatically cause we don't have to automatically create a supernatural cause because of it. So that's the problem with the cause and effect. It is a strong argument, but the strong argument falls the moment you start asking, where did God come from? And when you see that there are certain things we don't understand, but just because we don't understand them, just because we don't have enough evidence to prove certain theory, that doesn't mean that automatically that was a supernatural being. So people very often say, you know what, it's impossible for something dead to become alive. We have not seen this yet. It's true we don't have the evidence of it yet. Maybe the evidence will never be found out. But just because we don't know and we don't have the evidence, we don't have the experiments to prove it, that doesn't automatically mean that it was a supernatural source. So I would say get very comfortable with the answer, I don't know. We don't have enough evidence to make this conclusion. But just because we don't have the evidence to find out what caused something, that doesn't mean I'm going to insert God, Satan, demon, angel in that place. Because it's very, very common. I've met a person who was trying to prove scientifically that she can prove that angels or demons or ghosts basically exist. And she would go to people's houses that she had a whole bunch of gadgets, and she would scan the walls and floors and whatever. And I'm like, wow, awesome. If you have scientific proof of existence of ghosts, I really want to know what that is. I read her book. I discussed with her and her husband. I'm like, I need to know. I'm not mocking you. I'm not saying that you're wrong. I want to know, what technology are you using to detect ghosts? Why do you say, oh, the ghost is in this corner, but it's not in this one? What causes you to believe this? What device are you using? And to make the long story short, she basically finished the conversation very quickly. And she said, well, I don't care if you don't believe me. We see that this is a cold spot. Cold spot in the room was enough evidence for her to believe that there was some sort of demon in there, or ghost. And I'm like, okay, well, what else do you have? I'm like, well, I was sitting in the car. I got out of the car. I came back, and on the seat of the car, there was a feather. And the door was closed. Nobody opened the door. Nobody got into the. How is it possible that the feather came in? I know it must have been an angel looking after me and left me a feather. I'm like, out of all the possibilities that could have taken place, that some sort of feather got stuck to your ass, and then you got into a car and you couldn't possibly see it, but then you got out of the car, and then later on you saw it. I mean, that is not more logical than an angel who was flying over, lost his feather and dropped it inside your car. That is more logical conclusion to accept. Well, she wasn't happy about that. So for me, that didn't make sense. So I'm like, okay, I keep on looking. The cause and effect. Another reason why people believe that God exists is authority. I think this is one of the most common. Authority basically goes like this: somebody smarter than me Somebody is an expert in this field. I'm not an expert. I'm an average guy. I work in construction. I clean houses. I don't know. I'm a dentist, whatever it is. That's my specialty. I am not an expert when it comes to spiritual things. This is why I have a priest, rabbi, elder, governing body, you name it. Somebody sees another person as an authority figure, somebody who is smarter than them in this field, and they trust them. They're saying, you did the research, you read 5 Bibles, you read Quran, you read the Book of Mormon, you read all those books, you study your life for a very long time, and you concluded to this. Therefore, I take your word for it. Now, it is true that we should listen to experts, but even the most convinced experts make mistakes. And the problem with authority figures is if the authority figure makes a mistake, you will automatically become a victim of that mistake. So if they're wrong, you're wrong because you basically took their word for it. So if you go to a dentist and the dentist will recommend, root canal, and you're like, you were an expert, okay, go ahead. And then they screw up the job, you paying for their mistake. And it's the same thing with any authority who comes to what we call spiritual things or religious things. People trust their priests, their rabbis, their elders, or whoever is the leader in the church. They view them as an authority figure, and this is why they accept what that person says. That is, I would say, majority of people reason why they believe in God. They were told. They were told by their parents. They were told by their community. They were told by authority figure in their church. And they were convinced because somebody else told them that this is how it is. They didn't have time, energy, or reason to question their authority because they felt inferior to the person who was explaining this. Personally, for me, that is obviously not strong enough evidence, not strong enough reason to believe that God exists, because there are authorities in every religion. Every religion would have their own person who would say, I know the path. I know the recipe to salvation. I know that if you want to be saved by God from doom, you have to do X, Y, and Z. And whoever claims that they know the recipe becomes an authority figure to another person. But the problem is you go from one religion to another, and you will hear an exactly opposite beliefs. One person would say, you must accept Jesus in your heart in order to be saved. Another person will say, if you call Jesus a son of God, you will be condemned to hell. Both people will spend decades reading books and believing and having very strong faith, and they will have opposing beliefs. The arguments that they're using are almost identical. They're just using, one is using the Bible, the other one's using Quran. One will point out to the problems with Quran, the other one will point out to the problems in the Bible. And that authority figure person couldn't convince me because I saw the same patterns in every religion out there. So another reason, emotional support. Emotional support, believe it or not, it's something that keeps people in. Maybe it's not a reason why people join, but it's usually a reason why people stay. So emotional support usually happens with the community that the church is creating. However, the idea, the fact that people believe in someone who is invisible and is taking care of them, someone who is watching them all the time and cares about them and loves them for who they are, and is like a loving father figure. That thought is very comforting for many people. They feel emotional support that, oh, nobody understands me in this world, but God will understand me. I experience an enormous amount of justice from many people, but God will give me justice. And they create this inside of them feeling, you know what, God gave me that peace. I feel peace now. And because they feel peace, they are at peace. They feel God gave them that peace. I receive the Holy Spirit. I receive grace. And because of it, I'm at peace now. And they have this emotional support because they strongly believe that God gave it to them. Again, the same argument can be abolished by simply looking at religions who are totally different than yours. The same arguments are being used by Muslims, Christians, Jews, Hindus. And you're looking at these people and they're like, you know what? They created it. I went to India. I saw how people worship their gods. It's mind boggling that very intelligent people would take their god and they would wash him and feed him. And I don't know how they feed him, but they just put a whole bunch of food around him. And they put this incense and burn things in front of the god and they bow down in front of him and then they worship him. And when you ask them, they're like, this God gave me peace. I feel connected to this deity. And they feel emotional connection. They feel emotional support. Now, a Christian would look at this as that's all false gods. These people are just deceived by Satan and demons and so on. It's completely wrong. And there's no way these people will be saved by a piece of wood that they're bowing down to. And yet, the person from that perspective looking at Christians and like, what are you guys talking about? Your God is just like one of many. So the emotional support also didn't hold water for me because I'm like, it's happening everywhere. So emotional support can be deceiving because people feel connected. Some people feel connected to who? To their loved ones who passed away. And they're saying, yeah, their spirit is still in this room. They feel connected with their clothing. They feel connected in this room. This is why the whole sentiment happens. Like somebody's connected with another person and they're not willing to get rid of the person's old clothing or tools that the guy was using, whatever it is, because they're emotionally connected. It reminds them of that person. And in this environment, they feel at peace. They feel their presence. They feel connected. And the same thing happens when it comes to God. They imagine God, whatever God they're imagining, and they're saying this God is watching me and he's loving me and he cares about me. But when you ask them, oh, is God watching you all the time? They're like, yeah, yes, God's watching me all the time. Well, then why would you do things against God's will, knowing that this is something that he doesn't like, knowing that he's right next to you, watching you? Is he watching you in your bedroom? Is he watching you when you maybe, I don't know, watching pornography? Is he watching you when you're swearing? Is he watching you when you're smoking? And maybe that's against their own values. Maybe they know they're lying and they're like, well, can you imagine God standing right next to you and you're lying to somebody? Like, would you do this? Is he really that real to you? So of course, then people often say, well, and when they need him, when they pray to him, they feel connected, but in other times they don't feel the same connection. So emotional support didn't work for me, didn't convince me, mainly because I saw the same pattern in other religions. Something I mentioned already, but I'm going to mention one more time. God of the gaps. What is God of the gaps? God of the gaps is basically this. Here is our knowledge of the world around us. This is how we understand how everything works. But there are gaps in our knowledge. There are certain things we don't know. There are certain things that no matter how much testing we do, how much discovering we do, we just have no idea how that happens. And maybe we will never find out. Just like discovering a fossil, and you pick up the fossil, and maybe it was a flower. And that fossil, it gives you a rough idea of the shape, but you will never know the color of that flower. You will never know how that flower smelled. That data is gone. So you have very limited knowledge of what took place in the past, and certain knowledge will never be gained. Like it's just simply gone, no matter what we do. So is it possible that we will never find out what caused life to exist? Of course. It happened so long ago, we simply don't know, and maybe we will never know. That's a gap in our knowledge. And because there's not enough evidence, maybe we'll never find out. People inserted God into that gap. And they're saying, if there's a gap in the knowledge, we're putting God in there. God caused things to be alive. God started the whole universe to be. God caused this species to change to different species. And they're inserting God every time there is a gap in scientific knowledge. But the problem with that God of the gaps is the moment the gap closes, God disappears. Just like I gave you the example of lightning and Thor. When people didn't know where tsunami would come from, they would say, hey, there must have been the Poseidon or Neptune, depending where you lived. And people created God of the sea. Why? Because they didn't understand why would God get so angry at them and put a huge wave, and they flooded the whole village, and they had to appease the God and give him a whole bunch of food or sheep or whatever it is that they had. But the moment we understood how the continents shift, how earthquakes happen underneath the oceans, and how you don't need actually wind to cause waves, but you could have a tsunami coming, then all of a sudden that God of the sea disappeared. It became a myth. And if anybody says today, hey, you know what? I think Neptune caused the big storm, they're looking at him like, what's wrong with you? We already know what causes big storm. We already know what causes tsunamis. We don't need that God in order to explain those things. But the problem is there are certain gaps in our knowledge when it comes to explaining the life that we see around us, and people still insert their God depending where they live and where they were brought up or at what time in human history. And the God always changes, but it's just, well, God did it. And that's it. The moment you say God did it is the moment you're turning off your brain. For thousands of years, people thought that, hey, guess what? God is punishing people with diseases because you're sinful. So if you sinned, therefore you're sick. That's why you're dying. And with that explanation, people didn't look for medicine. Why would they look for medicine if this is God's punishment? Even in the Bible, I think people came up to Jesus and they said, well, who sinned? This guy was born blind. Who sinned, him or his parents? Why is he being punished? Because they didn't understand. They couldn't understand. They couldn't explain this properly. If you go to Hinduism and you ask, why is a child being born blind? They will have a totally different explanation. They would say, guess what? This person did something bad in a previous life. This is his karma. And because of his karma, we're not going to help him because he's being punished for all his sins, all the misbehavior, all the bad things he did in his previous life. That is extremely dangerous. It's extremely dangerous because for thousands of years, because of this explanation, people did not look for better answers. Only those who said, hey, you know what? Maybe we're getting sick for a different reason. Let's take a look at things that are super small. Viruses, bacteria, mold. Let's look for different answers. And those who didn't attribute being sick towards sinning and got punishment came up with much better answers, connect with the real answers. So be very careful with inserting God into a place where you say, I don't understand this, therefore supernatural being must have done it, because that itself will limit you and you will not be able to find what is really happening. But because you're saying, oh, it's impossible. It's impossible. This is how superstitions are taking place. This is how different beliefs are being formed because you think it's impossible. It's funny how superstitions are being created. Somebody would walk on the road and they fall down, they trip. And our brain's trying to figure it out. What happened? What was the cause? Remember the cause and the fact? What was the cause? I walk this road all the time. Nothing happens. Right now, I flipped. And you're thinking what you did today. I walk underneath the ladder. Black cat crossed my road. Right? And then people come up with those crazy explanations to what caused them to be to their misfortune. Yeah, you're not allowed to walk underneath the ladder. You're not allowed to break a mirror. You're not allowed to cross a road when the black cat crossed your road, because all those superstitions led people to believe that, oh, they have misfortune because of this pattern. Our brain is always looking for patterns, always. And if we cannot find an explanation of why something happens, we will create a cause. But the moment we figure it out, what was the real cause, what was the reality of it, very often it's simply extraordinary coincidence, then the God of the gaps disappears. And the God that people invented, whether it was 1,000 years ago and 5,000 years ago, it goes into mythology because we now have a real explanation. So protect your mind from that superstition, from that conclusion of it must have been a supernatural source because I have no better explanation for it. Next one, carrot and a stick. Just in case. Jack, please, just in case. If there is heaven, I want to end up in heaven. If there is hell, just in case, I don't want to be punished. So might as well believe. Come on. What harm will it cause? If there is God, if there is Jesus, if there is grace, if there is salvation, at least I'm going to be on the good side. And if there isn't, then there's no harm to me. But if there is, and I'm on the bad side, I'm going to be punished. I might be killed in Armageddon, or I might be tortured in hell. Who wants that? So just in case there is God, right? That's the carrot. Better do what he's telling you to do. Better believe, better give your life to him, or whatever it is. And at the same time, there is a stick, which means if you don't, you're going to be killed, punished, tortured, whatever it is. Well, the problem with this argument, just in case, I'm better off on being on the right bus, as some people said. Then the problem with that is, how do you know which God to believe in? How do you know which recipe for salvation to choose? Where every religion out there has their own recipe. And there are thousands of recipes. And every single one of them believes they have the true recipe of how to be saved, how to get to the paradise, how to get to heaven. They all do. And they all will tell you that if you don't follow their specific recipe, your chances of getting to heaven or to be rewarded are next to none. Worse yet, you're going to be punished. You're going to be punished if you go to, you join another church, you join another religion, you worship God in a different way, you don't follow his holy book, then you're going to be destroyed, doomed. Think about it. Billions of people for thousands of years count hundreds of millions of gods, hundreds of millions of religions. People don't have access from one side of the world to the other side of the world. What did these people believe in? We'll say, well, Christianity is the answer, or Muhammad is the answer. Well, think about all the people who before Christ, before Muhammad. What about them? What about people in North America? There were millions, tens of millions of people lived in North America. When did they find out about the Bible, about the Islam, and all those religions? Recently. What about previously? What chances they had for their so-called salvation? They had a totally different way of life. When Christians actually came to this continent, what did they do? Well, it didn't end well for them. I tell you that much. They spread Christianity all over North America with a very, very bloody history. And I know a lot of Christians might say, oh, but they were not true Christians. No, they were not really following Christ. Well, you know what? Read the Bible and look what people did in order to get to the promised land. The history is the same. So why is it in the Old Testament the Jewish people could just go and slaughter everybody on the way and say, join us or die? But when Christians did the same thing, they're not true Christians. This is where I really have a hard time with all this carrot and a stick idea, because it closes people's mind and it threatens people. In some countries, actually, this threat is being illegal. They're saying, you know what? You can teach your kids religion. Don't threaten them with torture. Don't threaten them with Armageddon. Because it's just imagine this. Imagine an average Jehovah's Witness who is hoping to go to heaven, his belief is that he's going to be one of the 144,000. And he believes that he will end up with Jesus, and then he will come back here during the Great Tribulation at the very end, during Armageddon, and he will slaughter everybody who's not a witness, who was not chosen. He actually, because he believes this, he can go door to door and say, join my religion, do what I tell you, or I will come back and kill you. If he was honest, he could actually say this. And guess what? If you were actually to say it, you would end up in jail. This is illegal to say this, illegal to threaten people with death or torture, as a matter of fact. And yet everybody in the religion does it. No matter what religion you go into, there's always a reward for listening to what people tell you and a punishment if you don't. And it's not a little slap on the wrist for not listening to God. It's eternal torture, Armageddon, horrible death, separation from God, whatever it is. They will come up with answers that we can't possibly find a government, a president, a king, you name it. You can't find a man or a woman that would actually do this to anybody. And we would conclude, yeah, that person is good. Can you imagine? Can you imagine taking a king and saying, yeah, this king is good. He just, whoever disagrees with this king is being burned. And burned in such a way that the person doesn't die, but we just burn him for a while, and then we wait until his skin grows back, and then we burn him again, and then we're just going to torture him forever, and with no possible hope that this will ever end. That's what majority of Christianity or Muslim world believes in. It's sickening to think that could actually be. But majority of Christianity would also believe in Jesus's return, that he will return, and oh boy, if he returns here, it's gonna be like the time of Noah. That's what Jesus said. People will not even suspect that, that they'll be just living a normal life, and all of a sudden Jesus comes here on the clouds, and every eye will see him, and it will not end up good for them. That stick is very strong, and if you threaten people with death or torture, they will listen, they will follow. It's especially very, very effective if you threaten children. So a child will believe in Santa Claus, and a parent would very often use this technique to say, if you behave, if you clean up your room, if you do what I tell you, you're going to get a gift. Santa will give you a gift. But if you don't, if you're not going to be a good boy or a good girl, you're going to end up with holes in your sock, and you're going to be punished somehow. The carrot and the stick idea does work, and it works very well. And a lot of people are threatened with extreme pain for not following what the religious leaders are telling them to do, or a good carrot of reward. You're going to be in paradise. You're going to be with Jesus. You're going to be in heaven. Can you just imagine if, let's say, you end up in heaven with Jesus, with God, in paradise, whatever you imagine. And a place like hell actually existed, or even Armageddon. But your children or your spouse were unbelievers. And God killed them, tortured them, burned them. Can you imagine being with that God, thanking him, worshiping him, saying that he's good, when you watched him kill your family in a horrible way? I'll leave that answer to you. The next one, complexity of life. Complexity of life. I think complexity of life is also one of the strongest arguments that is being used by theists for God's existence. The DNA is super complex, no question about it. Our eye, our brain, the whole system, everything so well working together. And you're looking at the whole universe, how everything works, and you're trying to figure it out. Well, how could everything work together so well, so complex? How could it all possibly become one? It's like you take a whole bunch of tools, you shake it, it will never become something good. You can't take a computer, you can't make a computer by shaking something. Random change does not produce something intelligent. It is, like I said, the complexity really is a very strong argument. But evolution doesn't really work like that. And not everything that we see all around us proves that it was designed by somebody who was intelligent, because you would see, I think there's like 80 different birds that cannot even fly. They have wings, they're too heavy to fly, feathers, everything. They're not capable. We have, I think, 30,000 species that drink blood alone in order to survive, and majority of them, they have poison. Now, you have to ask yourself, did God design this? Because it's very easy to say, oh yeah, God designed the beautiful rainbow, your eyes, your ears, right? You see the beauty in this world, and you cherry picking data by showing the things that you like and you enjoy. But at the same time, you're looking at mosquitoes and flies and ticks and CC flies and all the things that spread diseases and venom and bacteria and viruses, and you can't separate it. You can't say the good things were created by God, but the things that cause our life to be absolutely miserable, and we're constantly fighting against it. That God created those things as well, and He's watching us hopelessly fighting against it. Majority of our life and diseases we're fighting with things that we can't even see. They're microscopic, and scientists are trying to fight it. Just think about it. Things like leprosy. Leprosy was a disease that people were fighting with for thousands and thousands of years, and horrible, extremely painful disease. Jesus came and He healed some people who were lepers. Do you think He knew how to heal them permanently? Do you think He knew the recipe for medicine that would heal lepers permanently? Because I tell you, we do have it now. And if we have that medicine right now, we can cure leprosy within 2 weeks, few pills, and it's gone. Why wouldn't He give that knowledge to us? Why did we have to come to that knowledge ourselves? And who created that bacteria? Who created that disease? When reading in the Bible, when God gave that disease on purpose to many people as a punishment. Horrible, absolutely horrible. Which person would give a disease to another person as a punishment? Not a loving and caring person, that's for sure. So, complexity of life, if you actually, this is a deep subject, but if you actually study how evolution works and how tiny little changes are happening, then it will start making sense. But if you're looking at the huge gap of, oh, it's impossible for a monkey to become a human. Of course, it's impossible for a monkey to become a human, because you're looking at two different things. You're looking at a ladder. You can't find a ladder. Evolution is more like a tree. So when you're looking at evolution of languages, you know that from Latin language, you have Portuguese, Italian, Spanish. Those languages evolved from Latin. Now, Latin is no longer used. It's dead. It's extinct. But we have those three languages. Now, those three languages did not come one from another. You cannot say that Italian came from Portuguese, Portuguese came from Spanish, because you're looking at a ladder. It doesn't work like that. You have to find the roots of where did those languages evolved. And the reason why those languages evolved is because people started speaking a little bit different from one generation to another. And it started being different and different and different because the guy lived on this side of the river and this tribe lived on this side of the river, and they didn't communicate. And because they didn't communicate, over the many, many, many years, this tribe was no longer able to understand this tribe. And the moment they don't understand each other, we say that is a different language. If it's very similar and there's tiny little changes, we say, oh, that's an accent, that's a dialect. Like we have English, we have people speaking in Australia, Canada, North America, Britain, South Africa. Those are dialects. It's all English language, but there are differences. But you give enough time, and if we didn't have the communication we have today, you give a few hundred years, and every single country would develop a different language. That's the evolution of languages. And it's exactly the same when it comes to our DNA. Our DNA changes all the time. My DNA is tiny, 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 tiny little bit different than the DNA of my kids. My kids have a different DNA. The DNA from my kids will be different than their kids, and so on and on and on. One point, you'll see that there are dialects in people. So one person becomes black, another one becomes white, another person has a different shape of their eyes and a different shape of head, and so on and on and on. There will be time in the history of humankind when a person that lives in Africa will be so different from the person living in China or South America that their DNA will no longer be able to communicate with each other. And the moment they no longer communicate with each other, we say we have different species. And it happened so many times in the history. And you study how that works, how every single person copies their DNA to their offspring, but the offspring has small variants. It's like my kids are not identical to me, they're a little bit different. But because people develop in different environment, they change. This is why we have so many different cultures, not cultures, so many different skin colors and how people look differently. Even I'm Polish. I was born in Poland. I see with my own eyes the difference between Slovak people, Ukrainians, or Germans. For a person living in North America, they don't see the difference, but I see it. I can distinguish the difference, but I have a hard time distinguishing maybe Chinese person and Korean person and Japanese person. For me, that's a different subject, and it's difficult for me to see those differences. They understand them because that's what they developed over there. But we see how those things are being developed. For me, the idea that all the species that we see today and all the races and all how everything got developed, it all developed from one family 4,000 years ago that came out of an ark, and they all spread into all the continents and all the islands and everything, and black people became black in Africa, and all the Chinese people became the way they are, all with that short period of time. And you're looking at what is it, 6.5 million different species, which means that Noah would have to take like 13 million different animals into his ark, and they're all somehow fit in there, and he was able to feed them for a year, and that many million of animals were taken care of by 8 people, and all these animals somehow jumped over the oceans and end up in different environments. For me, that is mythology. But if I study the history of evolution, how all the continents used to be together and life spread out all over the masses, and then the continents, as they still drift till today, separated, and then different environments grew, and animals were experiencing different food, different environment, different ground, different seeds, and so on. They developed differently, and this is why you go to Australia, I was here, and you will see animals that don't exist anywhere else. You go to South America, you see animals that don't exist anywhere else. You go to Madagascar, right? Where is it? Madagascar, right here, right? And you will see species that don't exist anywhere else because Madagascar separated itself from the mainland, and animals developed there. For us to believe that Noah took all these animals into his ark, for me, that's mythology. It does not make sense. But the complexity of life happened very, very gradually, and we can actually see it. We actually see evolution happening, and how things change, and then how DNA change the quickest in viruses. The quickest when we see, okay, virus mutates, and it can mutate within weeks, and we can see how it can change so quickly. Now you give a species like humans thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years, of millions of years, and you will see that those things are possible. But a little bit of digging does take place, and you have to have an open mind. Find out why people actually believe it. What are the basis for understanding of evolution? And things like complexity of life will make sense once you understand all the steps. If you're trying to understand the step from step 1 to step 10, it does not make sense. It's like I look at the complexity of human eye. I'm like, there is no way that the eye could happen like this. But then I saw all the steps. I saw animals that don't have eyes, and I saw animals who have a kind of like a cup in their head, and they don't have eyes either. And then those who have like a pinhole um, camera where light comes in, but there's nothing inside. They still exist till today. This is how they developed. There are animals who have eyes, but they're blind. They can see nothing, or their eyesight is extremely poor. So we see all the steps: step one, step two, step three, and this tiny little changes. We see all the stages, and then and only then it's starting to make sense. But if you're looking at how from monkey became a human, that does not make sense. Just like from Italian, Portuguese didn't happen, because that does not make sense. That's not how evolution works. So do a little bit of digging, and you will see that the more you study the subject, the more it will make sense. But at the beginning, it might seem like, wow, that's just not possible. And the last one, morality, good versus evil. And they say very often to me, Jack, if it wasn't for God, we wouldn't know what's good, what's bad. Because of God, we know what's good, we know what's bad. It's in us, it's in our heart. And without it, there is no way. Well, I often ask people, well, where do you get your morality from? What do you consider moral or immoral? And I say, wow, it's immoral to kill a person. I'm like, okay. I'm just gonna stick right now with Christianity, because I know majority of people who are listening to me, they used to be or are currently a Christian. Then take the book that you base your morality on and actually read it. Like, seriously, read it. And the very first thing that Moses did when he came down with the 10 commandments, when on the 10 commandments it said, do not murder, one of the 10 commandments, what was the very first thing that he did? He comes down and he sees people who changed their religion. That's right. They changed their religion. They believed in one God, but because they were used to seeing many gods in Egypt, they're like, hey, we're going to make another God. Aaron was their authority figure. You make a God for us. And he did. And they're all bowing down to him. Guess what? No laws yet. The commandments are still coming from the mountain. And Moses, the very first thing he does, he says, you take a sword and you slaughter everyone here. And if they are your brother or mother or father, you must not feel mercy. Just imagine you're there. And Moses is telling you to do this. Now, of course, to Aaron, he's like, Aaron, why would you do this? You know how these people are. Oh, okay then. Because that's his family. So no punishment to Aaron, who made the golden calf, but everybody else had to be slaughtered. Would you do this? But you don't understand, Jack. This is God must have his own will, and it was different times. I'm like, okay, I tell you just one example, because I could be here for 3 hours straight talking about the examples in the Bible of why that book, for me, is extremely immoral. Well, I'm just going to tell you maybe two. One is where Lot, supposed to be the righteous man, angels come for inspection because somehow God does not know what's happening in the city, so he had to send angels to do investigation. These angels do investigation. Yeah, this city is bad. And they go see Lot, and Lot is like, oh, there are people trying to rape my guests. So what am I going to do? Oh, here's the daughter. Here's the daughter. He gives his daughters to the mob for the daughters to be raped. And that's the good guy. That's the good guy. Now, I know Jehovah's Witnesses are trying to justify this by saying, oh, maybe there were some people that were his family, and maybe Lot was trying to confuse them. Well, read the story in Judges, where Benjamites rape a concubine. They also came to the door and they tried to rape the guy, and the guy gave them a concubine, and they raped her all night long until she died. The same story happens here. A whole bunch of people came and they said, we want to rape those two guys. And Lot says, oh, here are my two daughters, rape them. And that's the good guy that God loved. And he says, well, you got to be saved. Now, they're leaving the city, and Lot's wife turns around. That was her sin. She turns around, and God kills her. Turns her to a pillar of salt. If that's not mythology, I don't know what is. But God kills her for turning around. That was her sin. Then Lot escapes with his daughters. And then guess what happens? The daughters want to have children. And they live in the cave with their father. So let's get the father drunk. And then we're going to rape the father one after another. And then God will bless us. Boom. We have a baby. And 2 nations came out of it. And that is a book of moral stories. I'm asking people, should I read this story to my children and tell them this is good? Which part of it was good? Which part was moral? I'll tell you another story that actually shook me to the core. Okay? Story that I knew very well. I read it many times as a witness. And for some reason, it never clicked, because when you're under the influence of indoctrination, you are incapable of seeing what is moral. And that's what bothers me. You're incapable of seeing what is good, what is bad. And it's the story of David. David was the good guy, right? He grew up as a young boy, and then one of the first kill, when it comes to humans, of course, was Goliath. He chopped his head off. Bravo. Great guy. He killed the guy, and then David was very famous. How he became famous? Because he was killing tens of thousands of people. Now, Saul was killing thousands. David was killing tens of thousands. That was the good guy. Now, this good guy wants to get married. When he wants to get married, then Saul says, hey, you know what? Go kill 100 people. Bring me their pieces of their penises, right? Bring the foreskins here as a wedding gift. And he goes. And of course, he doesn't kill 100. He kills like 200. And he brings it as a wedding gift. That's sick. When you think about it, if somebody actually did this today, what would you say? Was that okay? Crazy. But that's not the worst part of the story. Then he wants to have more than one wife. He sees somebody else's wife. Oh, the woman is taking a bath. Oh, Bathsheba, nice, good-looking chick. He takes that woman and sleeps with her. Now she's pregnant, and he's freaking out. It's like, oh boy, she's pregnant. So now I gotta, maybe call her husband. Maybe he will sleep with her. I will cover it up. Now, of course, that doesn't work because the guy doesn't want to sleep with his wife. So then what he does is he conspires to make sure that the guy dies. And when the guy dies, what happens is he's stuck with this wife and the baby. Now, God comes and says, oh, you did something wrong. And this is what shook me when I read those verses. He says this: you took somebody else's wife in secrecy. I'm gonna take your wives, plural, and they're gonna be raped in public. I see you when somebody's waiting in the waiting room. I will get to you in a second. I'm just gonna finish my story. Okay. And it says, your wives are gonna be raped in public as a punishment for what you have done. Now, my question to every theist who believes this story is this: if Nathan, the prophet, would come to you and would say, this is God's will and this is his punishment for David, and he's asking you to take David's wife and rape her in public, would you do it? Would you do it? Would you say, yes, if this is God's will, he must have reasons more than me, he's smarter than me, whatever is his divine will, I must obey. If that's what he's telling me, I must do. Or you're going to say, no, this woman is innocent. She did nothing wrong. I will not punish her for the sins of David. Now, God obviously said more than once that he will not punish the children for the sins of their fathers, but for some reason, he not only was punishing the wives of David, but also David's child. And he wasn't a quick death either. Gave him a disease, and the child was sick and then died. That was a God of justice. This is why I have a hard time with this. This is why reading those stories in the Bible, I'm like, for me, that's immoral. It's immoral to rape a woman. It's immoral to punish somebody for somebody else's mistake. It's immoral to murder somebody. And yet, tons of scriptures are proving me otherwise, that no, this is okay as long as God did it. Or people said, God told me to do it. This is why this whole morality idea does not stick with me when it comes to the Bible or the God of the Bible. So those are my my arguments. I have somebody that joined me. I'm very curious about their perspective of things. Hello.
Hey,
How are you?
I'm doing all right. I agree with about everything you said, man. One of the ones I would want to mention, though, I would want to add to that list you have there is Samson. Of course, in our trusty Bible storybook here, they cut out the part about Samson where he kills, I think it was like 30 people to pay off his gambling debt. The stuff he does before Jezebel is like, man, awful. And he's supposed to be like the good guy,
Yeah.
and then or he kills everybody. And I'm just like, man, which again, it's just honestly nothing compared to all the stories you just gave. But like, yeah,
With the story of Samson, when we think about what happened on 9/11, some religious people destroyed the buildings and caused thousands of people to die, and they committed suicide by killing others. They felt they were divine, that God told them to do it, that the people that were killing, they were enemies of God, and they all justified it. We
yeah,
see them as terrorists, or as horrible people, as people that don't deserve maybe to even live. But Samson did exactly the same thing. He destroyed the building, killed himself, and killed 2,000 people, and he's the biggest hero.
uh-huh.
And yet he believed the same thing. God gave him that power in his hair, not even muscles, hair.
Yeah.
I mean, that's mythology 101, right? I mean, you read the story of Samson and you're like, oh my gosh. Yeah, it's weird. It's
Uh-huh.
weird. So my question to you is, since you joined, what do you think causes people to believe that all this is true?
Uh-huh. I want to go off what at first what I why I believed it, and that was because for me because they gave, at least with the witnesses, they gave me like a little bit of evidence. They would say like, oh, the Bible says that the earth is a circle, the circle of the earth, and they would talk about that, or a circle or a sphere, and the
Right.
Bible said that, and it knew it years in advance, so it must be true. So for me personally, it was because of the little bit of evidence that they gave. Of course, once I learned that the Bible also says the earth has four corners, or that it says that a bunch of unscientific stuff, mostly in Genesis, that
Yeah.
existed before light existed, which that's not possible. All that stuff. They ignore all the stuff that they don't like, and they go with the stuff that they do like. I hope that was an okay explanation, but yeah,
Yeah, no, I get it, and I think we take the world as it's presented to us. We believe basically everything until we have a reason to question it.
yeah,
And if it was presented to us when we were kids that Santa Claus is real, we would believe it until we're like, "What? It's not?" It was the parents who put the gift in there. I thought he was, this magical guy who came through the chimney.
Yeah.
So it's funny to us now, but if you actually lived, let's say, on an island where everybody believes in Santa Claus,
Mhm.
then you would believe it as well. You would have no reason not to. And if you don't have a reason not to, then you would accept the reality as it's presented to us. I want to address some of the comments, and I apologize I didn't address them earlier, but I wanted to finish my point of view before I address some people's questions. One person says this: there are two gods in the Bible, one in the Old Testament and the one in the New Testament. It could be argued there are many more gods in the Bible. That is true. I think the word Elohim is plural. It represents. I think the exact translation is the mighty ones. So it represents more than one God. There was a huge debate on that subject. But you can separate those two. I don't think you could separate Old Testament with a New Testament saying there are two different gods. There's definitely two different values and two different character of when it comes to love and forgiveness and caring. The God of the Old Testament is very vengeful and jealous and punishes people for many generations to come, while the God of the New Testament is always like forgiving and grace, and no matter what you have sinned, it will be forgiven to you. Jesus paid for your sin, and don't worry, you just gotta have faith, and then you'll be fine. Until you read the Revelation, and then the Revelation is like, oh yeah, I forgot, I'm coming back, and I'm gonna slaughter everybody, and birds will come and eat your eyes, and you're like, oh, is that the same Jesus? Is that the same loving God? Right? And like, and yeah, and people would justify it no matter what. So I don't know. Kind of odd.
Yeah. One of the things I would point out about the Bible is just that it wasn't all written at once. So you just mentioned Revelation. Revelation came so long after Genesis did, and it was written by people who had read the other books, so they could add their interpretation into it. They could change things. That's why it says like call Satan the original serpent in Genesis. When Genesis was written, the snake or the serpent was just a serpent. It wasn't originally Satan, and then they added that later on that Satan was the original serpent. That didn't come until like Revelation. So it was written over many years by many different authors, and any book series like that has contradictions and wildly different characterizations.
Right. So I'm gonna bring one more comment here. Jack, if you had a real encounter with an entity, you would know what that is without a doubt. This has happened to me. So that's going back to the personal experience. People experience things they cannot explain scientifically. They can't explain any other way. Maybe it's a feeling, maybe they saw something, they heard something, and they cannot explain it. They say this must have been a miracle. So I'll give you an example of what happened in my life, where I think I mentioned it on another video. My father passed away, and I went back to Poland. He was in Poland, and I went to his home. And after he passed away, I walk into his bedroom, and I hear somebody eating. Okay, like I could hear somebody eating and chewing, and I'm alone at home, and I'm like, am I losing my mind or something? Right? Like I left his bedroom, no more noise. Walk back in, I can hear it. Walk out, I can't hear it. I'm like, something in, but I know I'm alone. It's not like there is somebody sitting here. So, with my scientific mind, I came to the conclusion that there's something I don't know, but I really didn't want to believe that that's his spirit or his soul or his ghost came back because he forgot to eat something. But I invited my neighbor, and I'm like, neighbor, is this in my head or do you hear it as well? So I brought her in and like, walk in and tell me, what do you hear? So she walks in and she's like, oh, she's freaking out. And she just ran out of that room. It's like, there is a ghost of it. I can hear somebody eating. And I'm like, that's what I hear. So like, how is that even possible? So she freaked out and she concluded it must have been a spirit because she's a Catholic, believing in soul and whatever, right? So But I'm like, I want to find the answer. I'm not gonna leave it that this is his spirit that came to this room. So I'm putting my ear to absolutely everything in the room, and I'm touching the chair, I'm touching the carpet, I'm touching the wall, I'm touching the window and the curtains and everything. Like I want to find out where is this noise coming from, and it came from behind the cabinet. So I moved the entire cabinet, and I'm still going like every square inch with my ear, and I found there were termites, and the termites were making that noise. But see, if I didn't know that, if I gave in to that fear of, oh, you know what, maybe it's his ghost, that would have stuck with me, and I could say very easily I had a personal experience, and I felt my father's soul or his ghost as his presence, and I could hear him eating, because that was the conclusion of my neighbor. But the moment you find out what was the real cause, there's no more need for supernatural explanation. And I think this is where deception happens, and it happens to all of us because we experience something we can't explain, and therefore you say it must have been God, it must have been divine, it must have been supernatural. And it happens in every religion, in every belief, no matter what God you believe in. If you, I mean, you live in North America, right? The same like me.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of people, Aboriginal people, who believed in spirits, who believe in nature, and they had certain rituals to connect with the dead ones and with the spirit of a wolf, the spirit of an eagle, spirit of a tree, and they believe all those things. Why? Because their knowledge of those things was very limited, and they explained everything that they couldn't understand with spirits. Now you go to a Christian nation, they'll say God did it, Jesus did it, angel did it, demon did it, Satan did it. You go to Muslim nation and they will have a similar, although a little bit different explanations. So it depends on where you were born and what you were told, usually by authority or by the culture that you grew up in. That will cause you to believe a certain way. Just like my Catholic neighbor, because of her believing spirits and ghosts and purgatory and all those things, that was her conclusion. But because me, I'm like, there's a piece of information that I'm missing. Let me do more investigation. Let me find out if let me eliminate all other possibilities. And then when I find out what was the real cause, no need for a supernatural explanation. So that's the only way I could. But go. You know what? Sorry. Going back to this question, Maverick, I agree with you 100%. If I experienced God, if God or supernatural source would actually reveal himself to me, then I would have no choice but to believe it. I would accept that 100%. But until I actually experience that supernatural source, or it's being detected in somehow, there is no reason for me to conclude that there is supernatural source. So all what I have right now is you telling me that you experienced this. That's all what I have to go by. And I can't come to that conclusion simply by he says or she says. I need something more. For me, if an average person like me, for example, or you, if we can prove to other people that we exist so easily, then why Almighty God has a hard time doing this for thousands of years? You know what I mean? You
Yeah.
might agree with me or disagree with me, but I think everybody believes that I exist. And I didn't even spend any time trying to prove that.
Yeah. So I agree 100% with all of what you just said, but I would also add on that just because it's similar to what you were saying earlier with the whole thing with the termites, even if you didn't know what it was, that's the best thing you can say. That's the most honest thing you can say is I don't know. It's
Bravo.
better
Yeah.
for you to, I don't know than it is for you to say, well, it must be a spirit because I don't know what else it is. So I can say it's anything, or I
But
could
think
just say, hey, I don't know. I don't know
100%.
what it.
And look what happened. Look what would have happened if I accepted this theory
Yeah.
of my father's soul or ghost is in that room, what would happen?
Yeah. You could believe that. You might still believe that. Like, yeah, I had this experience of I
I
met
would,
my father's soul, and
I would
all right,
very quickly be spreading that to other
yeah,
people. I'll be telling them that it was my personal experience. And if they didn't believe in supernatural sources, I'll tell you what I personally heard. And it was my neighbor who heard it as well, right after my father who passed away. And worse yet, the termites would start eating half of the room,
yeah,
right? And that's what
exactly.
happened for so long when people concluded, hey, God is causing you to be sick. And they didn't look for better explanation.
Exactly. Now we have medicine, and now we can find out the things that are. And like you said, we wouldn't have any way of knowing that stuff if people just stuck with the conclusion that well, I guess God, it was God or it was demons.
Yeah. This is where I think some people say, "Oh, just leave people alone. It's not really dangerous." I think it is dangerous. I actually think it is dangerous. Think about it this way: we study diseases and we study pandemics.
Mhm.
Why the pandemics were so widely spread back in the day? It's majority because of the beliefs.
Yeah.
So the belief was, okay, God is punishing us for something. Now we have to go to church and beg him for forgiveness. And they had a statue of whatever God they believe in, or priest, or Holy Mary, and they would go and kiss it. Hundreds of people, thousands of people going to the same place of worship, they'll go kiss and pray. What do you think that would do when there is a pandemic?
Oh man. Yeah. No, that's probably the worst thing you could possibly do. Like
Now,
they probably assume they're worshiping the wrong God or something.
do
But
you know who didn't go to church?
hmm.
There was that woman that would go into the forest and she looked for herbs and whatever, and she wanted to stay healthy and kept herself separate from everybody in the church. She was the one that was healthy.
Hmm.
She must have a demon. She's a witch.
Oh my God.
You get it?
Yeah. Yeah. No, this.
Right? And
That
that
really.
those beliefs were extremely dangerous, literally for some people deadly. And
Mhm.
there still are till today, because countless example of people like Jehovah's Witnesses, for example, they would refuse blood transfusion because they believe that God will reward them later on with everlasting life. Why would you extend a little bit of life right now in this miserable old system of things if you can live forever in paradise? You're better off refusing a medical treatment, even if it's a child, it doesn't matter,
Mhm.
and then have everlasting life. Those are, I believe, extremely dangerous beliefs that can cause somebody to die or be very sick. And I think with that, we have to fight. We have to fight and try to spread as much awareness as we possibly can. There's countless of people who would say, "Oh, you know what? I've been covered with the blood of Christ. No disease will ever touch me." Tons
Mhm.
of people. I've seen them on TV. And there's countless example of people who are pretending to heal others. I think now that's also quite damaging. They're like, "Come to me, we'll pray to Jesus, and whatever disease that you have, we'll get rid of it." And they trick people into this, and people are giving up their houses. They're liquidating all their assets, and they're giving it all to the priests and or rabbi or whatever authority figure they have in their church. Please heal me, please heal my son, my daughter. It is so dangerous. People don't realize that. If this was anywhere else, the government would step in and would say, "This is a fraud, we're shutting you down, and you go to jail." If you try to say, "Oh, you know what, I came up with my own medicine that this will cure cancer," you will actually end up in jail. You cannot do that legally. You cannot do that. But as long
Yeah.
as you say, "That's my church, that's my belief, God heals people, I'm just a vessel," you can say whatever you want. And I've seen countless amount of people who would not take medical treatments, or they would avoid it on purpose because they believe God will save them. They have alternative methods, and they pay the highest price to it. To those who believe very strongly, I tell them this: if you had a choice between praying to God for healing your child or taking that child to an atheist doctor, which one would you choose? Would you rely on the medicine and the atheist, or would you rely on God? You answered that question to yourself. Imagine that a scenario. Imagine you're in the court and everybody in the court believes in God. The judge, the jury, all the lawyers, everybody. And the guy who's being accused of a murder stands up and says, God told me to kill that person. Who would believe him? Who would believe him? Everybody believes in the same God. Everybody believes God answers prayers. Everybody believes that God communicates with humans. The guy says, this is what God told me. This is what I have done. I did God's will. Who would let him go free?
Certainly not me, man. That wouldn't be admissible.
I don't think anybody would.
Yeah.
I don't think the strongest believers on this planet would let the guy go free. Now you got to ask yourself, why not? Do they doubt that God exists? Do they doubt that God communicates with him? Do they doubt that there was God's command? They pray and believe in the same God. Why wouldn't let the guy go free?
How would we have any way of telling? Is another thing I'd ask. Like, how would we know?
That's exactly the question. How do we have any way of testing if your communication with God could be verifiable? You can't. So you can come up with any BS you want, and we just have to accept it. Or we say, oh, maybe he did, maybe he didn't. If it matches your belief system, saying, oh yeah, God told me to go this route, and then I saw an accident and I saved the person from death. God must have directed me that way. They will believe it because he matches their idea of who God is. God is loving, caring. He could foresee things. He knows all things. For sure, God directed you that way.
Mm-hmm.
But if the guy would say the exact opposite, God told me to go this way and I felt it and I caused an accident and I killed 5 people, then it's no, you couldn't possibly be God. No.
Unless they were apostates.
You must be sick in your head. You must be crazy. You question your sanity. We can't verify nothing. And until there is actual proof and some sort of evidence, why would we even accept these kind of beliefs?
I 100% agree. Maybe the 5 people that got killed were apostates or something, but that'd be my best guess. I don't. I 100% agree with you though, man. I think you need proof and evidence to say this kind of stuff because people shouldn't be able to speak for God. I think that's a really harmful thing because once somebody believes you, you know, it doesn't matter what the rest of the story is.
That's the problem, right? It's people look at everything as like, oh, it doesn't matter. I spoke with one lady today who's a very strong believer, who was a witness, and now she's all about Jesus and everything. And I'm like, okay, you know the stories in the Bible, you know everything, and I'm like, how do you even justify all the things that happen in the Old Testament? And she's like, I can't think that way. I can't go there. Look, I don't know. I don't have all the answers. All what I know is Jesus saved me. I'm saved by his grace. And I know I'm going to be with him after I die. I don't have any other answers. And in order for you to get the same salvation, you have to humble yourself. You have to be like the child and accept him in your heart, and you're going to be saved as well. And I'm saved from what? I don't know.
My big issue with that is when you have a belief, you got to start at the bottom. You don't start like at the top. Like if you're building a house, you don't start with the roof. You start with the foundation.
Yes.
You got to start at the bottom with how do I know that this book is true? How do I know that God is real? Then how do I know that he inspired the Bible? Then how do I know that he's well, then you go from there to see if he's good and whether or not you should worship him. But
Yeah.
each of those claims like rests on top of one another, and if you start at the top, then you just use that belief to prove itself, and we call that circular reasoning. So
Yeah.
the Bible's true because it says so in the Bible, which is true because it says so in the Bible. Like it doesn't, that gets you nowhere.
Yeah. Somebody mentioned this. A lot of Darwinian evolutionists are now seeing that life must have been seeded by some form of higher intelligence.
uh
Well, no matter how much you drill this, you will always end up with who created the higher intelligence.
yeah. um
No matter, you will never be left without this question. Like, if you believe that there was higher intelligence that created something else, then who created the higher intelligence? Where did that come from?
exactly.
You'll never be left alone without this.
Yeah, you get the infinite regress, I think they call it. It doesn't work.
No.
um you always have people too who try and blend, evolution and creation like that, but it doesn't really work.
Now, the person mentions the complexity. There is a scientific logic, evidence-based argument for intelligent design. Then, if it was an intelligent design, then you have to take into consideration everything that is around us. You have to say that somebody intelligently designed viruses, bacteria, venom, mosquitoes, ticks, fleas. All those things must have been intelligently designed by somebody actually planning on how to make a mosquito that will go and spread malaria and will cause more deaths and pain than any other creature on this planet. Somebody actually had to design it. And it wasn't a result of sin of Adam and Eve, because we were finding mosquitoes in amber from a million years ago. So it's not an argument that, oh, God cursed the world after the sin, and that's why there are so many diseases and so on, because we could very well see in fossils, in amber, in um uh what is it, the ice,
Yeah.
frozen, right? Different
Mhm.
bacteria and diseases. That means God or some sort of higher intelligence must have created those things very long time ago. Why? With a hope that you will make our life better?
One of the things I gotta add to this, the whole complexity thing, I put a comment in there too, but we don't tell design by how complex something is. You tell if something is designed by what by contrasting it with something that occurs naturally. So, for
That's right.
instance, one of the ones I've heard a lot is if you saw a bunch of sticks and mud in a river, right, and you see a dam that was built by a beaver, how do you tell the difference between the two of those? You would have to
Right.
compare the two of them. You can't tell by complexity because they're both. And that's another thing. How complex something is. A mousetrap is relatively simple. I mean, it's not especially complex, but we know it's designed because they don't occur naturally. So
Okay.
full
Uh,
complexity doesn't quite work. It's
True. Another question is, how do you know it was a million years ago? Well, there are, I think, 7 scientific methods that we use to describe how old certain things are. I think carbon C14 is one
yeah,
of the most commonly used, but it's not the only way of determining how old something is. But look into it. Look into how things are being dated. And very commonly, I hear from theists saying, "Oh, it's not accurate." Well, there is no measurement that it's 100% accurate. You can have a measuring tape, and the measuring tape has this little line, and that line has a thickness. So you can only measure to a certain degree, and there's always a margin of error. So a measurement like carbon 14 has, I think, 2 or 3% variation. So when we say something like dinosaurs lived 65 million years ago, we don't say 65 million 500,375 days, right? And then they died, right? Like we more or less could say, okay, it was 65 million years ago, but it wasn't 40 million years ago. When we have a specific method to determine how old something is, and then we compare it with other methods, and then if it's consistent, then we can come to that conclusion. Now the same person is saying DNA, 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 please, bro. Okay, actually the study of DNA was the number one reason why I accepted evolution as truth, because if you study DNA, you will see the tree of life. DNA is number one scientifically proven method of what we use to determine who was the father or mother of a child. Okay, it is so accurate that we use it in any court around the world, saying yes, based on DNA test, this is your father, this is your mother, this person is not your father or not your mother, because it is so accurate. We take it as a gold standard. Okay. And if you actually study how the DNA was decoded and how you can find traces, not only of your father, not only of your grandfather, but you go down the rabbit hole and you would find the traces of other animals who have exactly the same species, going down to even trees, and they have the same pattern. And you will see that in the DNA, you have things like a tail, you will see like the fur on your skin, but they're not active anymore. They're not active, but they're still in your DNA. So you got to ask yourself, did God created your DNA with piece code written for you to have a tail, and then he made it inactive so it doesn't grow beyond your tailbone? Did he actually do this? Or that it simply became inactive over the long period of time? You have two of those things that you can accept or not. But dig into this, because I was the same way. I'm like, look into DNA. DNA is too complex for us to say, oh, it just happened randomly. But DNA, decoding DNA, it was by far the strongest argument when I studied evolution. And I realized, oh boy, was I ever wrong? So yes, bro, DNA, DNA, DNA. Please dig into it. I think you might be shocked
all
of
the
what
evidence,
we're gonna find.
all the evidences you mentioned for evolution, they all, like you say, they're all consistent too. So you have genetic evidence, you have fossil evidence. Um, I can't remember the other ones right now. It's getting a bit late for me, but you have like, I think it's like several different lines of evidence, all that converge to tell you the same thing. And once I realized that, it was like, how can I continue to accept that something I have no evidence for?
Right. So Maverick wants to join. He says he wants to talk to us in person. I'm like, that's awesome. I love when people have the courage to do that. Maverick, click on the link I sent in the comment, and you can join us in discussion. I would love to have your perspective. Don't think that I'm only choosing people who share my beliefs. I always look for people who can contradict me, and I'm always looking into hearing the other side of the story. As a matter of fact, when I was on the fence with this, I was watching debates, and I loved watching the debates because I could see people who are scientists, and I saw people who are like Bible scholars, very strong theists, very strong atheists, and they're debating in universities on the highest level, and they're bringing their best arguments, and you listen to both sides and you get to choose what makes sense to you. So I love those debates, and one was never able to convince the other, but the audience got their best arguments, and that's what I loved about the debates, that you're listening to their best and the strongest arguments. And for me, that was really eye-opening. We're like, oh, I didn't know about this, I didn't know about that. And it truly helped me to shape what I believe in. And I'll be honest, if tomorrow somebody shows up and say, here is the evidence of God, this is why I believe God is real, this is how we can detect him, this is how we can figure it out, that he is real, I'll be more than happy to examine this evidence. If it convinces me, it would be the biggest scientific discovery of humankind. And I think everybody would celebrate. It's like, yes, finally, we have a proof of supernatural source.
Oh yeah.
I'm waiting for it with open arms. I changed my mind about God. I changed my mind about the Bible. I changed my mind about the religion. I'm not a person who does not change their minds. I'm very open to hearing other people's perspectives. So yeah, by all means. Maverick wants to, he says, hold on. So hopefully he will join us.
I wonder how this will go. I mean, I don't know uh, everything about this, obviously, but let's see. I'm open.
Nobody does. Nobody does.
Definitely open to hear.
Well, that's the thing. It's because he's in UK. He said it's 4 a.m. right now. But I love to talk about this subject. Well, it's too bad that you don't want to join us. We would love to talk about it right now. I don't know if I'm going to make another podcast about this subject because I know it's a very hot topic for many people and quite controversial, and there's strong arguments on both sides. And I received a lot of hatred from people who are theists, and yeah, they're very strongly opinionated about this. And yeah, it's weird that the more of believer the person is, the more nasty they become. Isn't that weird? The
Yeah.
more hatred, more bigoting, more name calling they will come up with. I heard, I think, well, not all of it, but quite many. Um,
Yeah. It's that's part of why I'm like, oh man, how's this gonna go? But
So no, but Maverick says all love. So I think he's a cool guy. I wish he could join. I know it's 4 a.m. for him, but I appreciate that you're at least watching, even at this hour.
yeah.
But maybe one more day. Uh, I actually wanted to do a debate with somebody else who is knowledgeable in this subject and is maybe on the other side of the spectrum and wants to present their idea. But for some odd reason, nobody has the courage to do it. I asked so many people. I said, let's do this together. You present your arguments, I'll present mine. We don't have to convince each other. We're still friends. Let's do a video together. And nobody did. Maybe somebody will have the courage to do it. I invite you. I'll be more than happy to share that with you. And I think it's very healthy to discuss those things. And at the end, we don't have to agree, but we're still friends.
Yeah, man. A respectful discussion like that, and how do I put this? Sorry, again, it's late, but I love respectful discussions like that because you can see their perspective, and it's raw and it's honest. And
Yeah.
like you said earlier, I would want to change my mind if I could see a better position. Why wouldn't I want to change my mind and change my beliefs? Heck, that's why I'm not a witness anymore because I did exactly that.
Okay, so Robert says, I have had paranormal experiences. I am open to both views, but what could be that explanation? Well, Robert, well, we don't know what kind of a paranormal experiences you had, so we cannot comment on it. But very often, we simply don't know what caused it, and then we say it was paranormal. Just because you don't have an explanation, logical explanation or scientific explanation, that does not mean that it was caused by supernatural source. It was something that you simply didn't understand or couldn't explain. But why? How do you go from I don't know what caused this to I know it was a ghost?
Exactly.
How do you go from one to the other? That's my question.
That's a big leap. Big leap.
Because you could say, I don't have proof, therefore I don't know what was the cause of this. I only see a result. But how do you go from I know the cause and I know the cause was a supernatural source, and the proof of it is I experienced it somehow. I felt the presence. I saw things moving.
Yeah.
That's how you go to Vegas. You see David Copperfield. He will blow your mind. And so many people, especially I think Jehovah's Witnesses, were like, "You never go there. The guy has a demon."
Yeah, I've heard my dad talking about certain tricks that like Penn and Teller did, where
Yeah,
uh, he's like, "Yeah, I think they have demon. There must be demon possessed," and that's the thing. All the a lot of the miracles performed in the Bible, like those can be performed by a magician on a stage in front of a crowd, walking on water, giving things like the wine turning to water to wine. I mean, things like this. Those tricks have been done. People shooting fire from their hands. Just you wouldn't believe the things that people
yeah,
can.
yeah, 100%, 100%. Okay, a perfect example. So Robert says, a grandma passed away. Her rocking chair was rocking after she passed. And see, based on that, people will conclude that yeah, there must have been still she's still there. She's still doing this. She didn't move out. That's her favorite chair. And that's usually enough evidence for them to conclude it was a supernatural source. It's mind-boggling that
Yeah,
out of all the other possible explanation of why the rocking chair was moving, where a simple air movement could cause this, and they're like, no, it must be a dead grandma. Hmm. But that's the thing. Like, if you don't know, you don't know. You simply don't know. I don't know if there was a mouse in that room and jumped out of this thing, or a rat or a cat or air movement. Of all the other possible explanations, why would somebody choose, oh, the chair is moving, grandma is still sitting there? Well, then you have to automatically conclude that a ghost is capable of moving objects, that they have a power to move something physical. Then, if they have that power, if they have that ability to move a curtain, move the door, move a chair, why can't they just freaking pick up a pen and write as a message? Why can't they do that? Why can't they take your phone and send a text message? Why can't they do this? But they moving curtains, and they're moving rugs, and they're moving chairs, and eating.
yeah, and then you have to start adding a whole bunch of different levels to this thing that you couldn't prove in the first place. And why not just say I don't know, or like you said, try and find a natural explanation for this that fits the situation. I can think of a few, but even if the room had no air movement and the rocking chair was still rocking for whatever reason, I'm gonna say at the end of the day I don't know until I can find out what it is,
Yeah.
if I can.
Yeah. And sometimes you will never find out. You just, the evidence disappeared. Like, if imagine you walk into a room and you see a chair moving. But
Mhm,
what caused the chair moving, maybe it was a cat that jumped on the chair and then jump out of the window. You don't see the cat no more.
mhm.
And you walk in and you have no idea. There was no breeze, right? There's everything. And then the chair is moving and you're freaking out. The evidence for the cat is gone. You
Mhm.
you can't see it no more. And then you come up with an explanation that it's not accurate because you have no proof that something else caused it. So get used to saying, I don't know, but if I find out more information, maybe I will know the real cause. Don't insert supernatural causes simply because you don't have the evidence to back up your theory. I'm gonna end with this
Mhm.
thoughts. Thank you for joining again. I
Yeah,
appreciate your input, because it's always easier if I'm not here by myself talking to an empty screen.
yeah. So
So
any
yeah, thank you, peace, brother. And if somebody has more questions, or somebody wants to talk to me personally, then please go to feartofreedom.ca, and over there you can click on talk to Jack, and you can send me an email. I'll be more than happy to discuss with you personally. Also, if you want to be on my program and you want to share your side of the story, and you want to maybe even debate me on some stuff, I'll be more than happy to do so. I think that's very healthy to show people that we can have a different viewpoint, different ideas, different beliefs, disagree on them, and still remain friends. That is something that was not possible for Jehovah's Witnesses, who accept everything or nothing. And if you believe something different, then you're automatically a threat to my faith, and therefore I must avoid you. You must be labeled as a worldly person or an apostate simply because you have a different beliefs. I very much hope that somebody will have the courage to come and discuss with me how they feel about their beliefs. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.